Drag and Drop Environments is an add-on for Blender from blendersensei.com, which allows you to drag any image from a Blender file manager window into one of Blender's 3D views, and it will automatically generate a world environment from that image live in the 3D view and create lighting rigs for render time, which can best take advantage of whatever file type you're using. So for instance, if you're using a pack of really high resolution HDR images that come with preview JPEG images, drag and drop environments can be configured to allow you to browse through the low-res JPEG images and be able to drop them into a 3D view window in Blender. And instead of loading that JPEG, it will load the associated HDR, HDRI, .exr, or whatever file type needed. There's also options to configure it to use JPEG images as backplates and allow the HDR images to control actual lighting and reflections and things like that. And this all gets handled automatically, so it's highly configurable and loaded with a bunch of other really awesome features that make life in Blender just a lot more cool. Okay, to get started here, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate how to install the Drag and Drop Environments add-on. So when you purchase the add-on, you will receive this file, which will say DND ENV unzip me. Basically, the new policy at blendersensei.com is if you download or buy a file and it says unzip me in it, that means, unzip that file. However, if you find a zip file without those words in it, that means do not unzip that file, and that is the file that should be used to install the add-on. So this says unzip me, so let's go ahead and do that. Now, depending on what zip software you're using or whatever, it may say extract or unzip or whatever, but whatever it takes to get that unzipped. So inside of that zip file were these two items, this environments folder and this DND Environments.zip, which is the actual add-on we will be installing. So we want to leave that file zipped. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this original download file. I've also got a blend file of the scene that I was showing at the beginning of this video, which we're going to use to demonstrate some of the features of the add-on. Alright, let's go ahead and open up Blender, and what I've got here is just a basic default vanilla install of Blender 2.79. So to get this thing installed, what we're going to want to do is press File, User Preferences, and then I'm going to expand this window so it's easier to look at. Click on this Add-ons tab here, and then down here where it says Install Add-on from File, that sounds appropriate, so we'll click that. And then I'm going to navigate to where I have the zip file, which is my desktop, so I'll click there, and there's the DND Environments zip file. And you want to make sure that you have unzipped the original all caps DND inv unzipme.zip file, which has this stuff in it, because this is the one we want to click on to install. I'm going to click on the add-on here and install add-on from file. Go ahead and press that. Now we can see that the add-on has been imported into Blender's settings. So all we have to do is activate it by clicking this check mark, and now the add-on is activated. We want to press Save User Settings here, and that means whenever we turn off Blender and then come back later and turn it on, the add-on will remain activated, which is good. That's what we want. Okay, so I'm done with this window and I'm going to exit out here. Installing the add-on has added two things. The first thing is this environments menu here we can click on, and this may be at the bottom here of your property shelf. If it's not in a location you prefer, like down here or in the middle or something, you can click on any of these menus and arrange them on your property shelf or tool shelf here, which is really cool. Another quick tip: if you hold Control and click on one of these down arrows on any of these menus, you can automatically shut everything except for the thing that you clicked on, which is a nice way to get organized a little quicker. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our little environments menu. The other item that the Drag and Drop Environments add-on has added to our user interface is this nice little library button. And what clicking this will do is temporarily change that to a file manager so that we can have quick access to drag and dropping environments out into our 3D view, but also other assets such as textures or blend files and things like that. So rather than just using this library button to go directly to your environments folder, what I recommend is setting up this button to point to wherever you keep all your general Blender stuff, projects, textures, whatever. It's just a really nice, simple way to access all your files and things. So if I press this library button, we can see here this has temporarily changed the timeline to the file manager. So what we're going to have to do is tell Blender what folder on our computer we want this button here to open. And we're also going to adjust this a little bit so that it looks the way we want. And then we're going to save our startup file so it will behave the same way every time. So if you take your mouse and you hover it over any panel in Blender, you can press Control up and that will maximize that panel. So we'll do that. I'm going to go ahead and set this location just to the desktop because that's where I have this file we're going to use and our environments. But you can browse through your computer and set this to any location where you like to keep all of your Blender stuff. So now that this is set to the desktop, what I'm going to do is click and drag these menus shut here. You just click on the edge of them to where you see those little dual little arrows and just drag and pull these things closed. And I'm going to even close that menu there. Then I'm going to press Control up again, which minimizes that window down. And now we have quick access to this folder here where we have our environments folder, which the drag and drop environments add-on comes with 5 16K environment maps. These maps include 5 JPEG backplate images and 5 HDR images, which you can see those are chugging along. That's why it's convenient to have the drag and drop environments add-on, because no matter what pack you're using, purchased from anywhere on the internet, you have a really simple, quick way to add environment images. Okay, so I'm going to click this up arrow, which goes up a folder, and go back to the desktop, because for this video, our desktop is just going to be our place where we keep all our Blender stuff. So now we have everything set up like we want. I'm going to click this library button shut, and I'm going to press File, Save Startup File, and then click Save Startup File again under OK. And now, if I were to close Blender and then say, open it up a week later, everything's going to be left exactly as I had it, including the location of this library folder here, which is nice. All right, so to actually add an environment, all we have to do is click our library button and click on the folder where we have whatever environment we want to add. Then select an environment, click, hold it, and drag it out into the 3D view. So when we drag an environment out like this, it automatically creates the required node rigs to use both the image and the related HDR. It sets everything up nicely so you can immediately see the environment in the 3D view, and it sets this up for both Blender render as well as cycles. Down here next to the library button, you'll notice this little widget here. And this is just a simple way to quickly control the thumbnail size and display of items in your library. So if you're browsing through a very large pack, say for instance the 16K HDR pack of 50 skies, which you can get at blendersensei.com, you may want to use this smaller thumbnail size. And when you're trying to view things closer, you can click the largest size there. There's also a little button to quickly change this to list mode when you want to see more information about files you're looking at. Okay, I'm going to go up in my library here back to where this facility blend file that I was showing you earlier in the video, and I'm going to click it, drag it, and drop it out into the 3D view so we can open that file up here. So let's click on our environments folder, skies, and I'll make that big again. And let's drop this really pretty sunset map that comes with the drag and drop environments add-on here. So I'm going to go ahead and close our library. Okay, you probably noticed that as soon as we dropped that environment, this menu went from being this one line of buttons here to a lot more really sweet options. So let's go over those. So at the very top, we have an energy slider. This gives us basic control over the energy of the environment image. If we increase that, it makes the environment image brighter, which thus makes the lighting in the scene brighter. So what I'm going to do to get a render preview going is I'm going to press Control B to make a render preview border, since my computer will be chugging along a bit. I'm trying to render this large scene along with the video capture. And then I'm going to press Shift Z to do a render preview here, so we can see how this lighting is affecting our scene. Okay, so here we can see the actual materials and lighting and things affecting our scene here. So if we were to increase this up some, we'll see that make this brighter. Or if we were to drop it on down, whoa, that's a little darker than I intended. You can see how that affects us there. Maybe get a close-up shot of these birds by this tree. It's pretty sweet. Okay, so I'm going to press Shift Z to stop that render preview. This default energy slider is useful when you need to make really subtle adjustments, like maybe by a few points. But you'll notice if you bring this energy much more past 2, then it can really start blowing out your environment image in ways that you probably don't want. So what would be great is if we could set our environment image, our background, especially for evening shots like this or low light shots of like space or things like that. What would be great is if we can set the actual display of the environment to look like however we want, but then have dynamic control over the way the lighting affects the objects. So we can really get the type of lighting results we want without blowing out our environment image. And that's what this Use Dynamic Source button is for. Okay, so let's press Shift Z to do a render preview again. Make sure this little button here isn't paused. Okay, so say I wanted to make this image a lot brighter, even though it's, an evening shot, so it's basically doing what it's supposed to. But say I were to, bring this up to, whoa. Now you can barely see anything going on in there, like 5 or something. So yeah, we're getting a lot more energy on our objects, but now the sky is totally blown out, which is no good. So what I'm going to do is click on that and enter 1 to change it back to its default state. Then I'm going to press Use Dynamic Source. And while this button is active, this energy slider will control the energy that goes to the lighting for the objects in the scene rather than affecting the display of the environment image itself. You'll also see this glossy slider, which gives us control over reflective surfaces, how much energy goes to those. So things like the glass in those buildings and the water will increase if we were to increase this glossy value. So you can see as I increase that glossy value, the ocean, the glass, and things are getting brighter. However, the environment image itself is staying the same. I could change that back to what it was, which was 0.5. And we could adjust the energy in the scene now. So a second ago we had it to around 5 and it was totally blowing out the background image, which sucked. So we can press 5 now and press enter. And so now we've got this super bright lit scene, but we're not distorting or blowing out our background image, which is great. Although 5 times the energy of this environment is obviously way too bright. But I think you get the idea and why that's useful. By the way, if you are a fan of the material on these rocks here, this is the sedimentary rock Raise AE material available in the Alchemy base pack, which comes with Alchemy, which you can also get at blendersensei.com. And actually there's 0 UV mapping done on any of these rocks because all of the materials from the included library that comes with the Alchemy Material Library add-on are procedurally generated. So I love just being able to drop stuff onto objects and just have it work without UV mapping when I can. There's definitely a place for UV mapping for sure, but it's nice to be able to create some secondary background objects when you need them without having to UV map. Okay, that's enough about Alchemy. I'm going to press Shift Z to turn that render preview off. One more thing I want to mention about this Use Dynamic Source button here. If you are using a setup where you have a backplate image in conjunction with an HDR, as is the default setup for drag and drop environments, then when you press this button, you're actually controlling a node group which controls energy directed from the related HDR image. The Use Dynamic Source energy controls will still be available whether or not you're using an HDR. It just won't be feeding these values from a high dynamic range image if you don't have one. Underneath our energy control, we have control over the color of our environment. So starting at the left here, we have a color palette which we can change. So say I wanted to bleed some, I don't know, some green into here, I could change this to green. And to actually introduce that into the environment, we just increase this blend slider here. And so we can get a little or a lot of that color value mixed in with our environment. To the right here, we have a button. If we press this, this gives us a lot more access to color control. And I'll just click and drag this menu out a little bit so we can see this a little better here. But when we have this open, we can change the way this is blending. So it's by default blending with multiply, but we could change it to overlay, which looks kind of cool. We also have control over our curve here, which you can use to control the overall color or adjust individual channels. And this reset color button is very useful because it allows you to do a lot of quick testing with stuff, but then you're like, oh wait, I don't like all that. You can go back to its default state really quickly. We can adjust these color curves to get things looking however we want. And then we also have some very basic brightness and contrast controls here as well. But I'll go ahead and press reset color and close that up there. Then beneath that, we have control over the rotation and dimensions of our environment. So this value to the far right here, this is going to control the rotation of the environment. And if you'll notice back in the beginning of this video, I was actually showing a scene that was being lit by one environment just rotated to 3 different angles and rendered at those different angles. Adjusting the rotation of your environment can really drastically change the mood of your scene. So let's press Shift Z here and get another render preview going. And that is just way too bright. Forgot we left that on 5. Let's click on that and lower it to something a little more reasonable. How about 2.5? There we go. Okay, so if I click on this value here to the far right, these different rotation values, you can see how quickly the mood and the atmosphere of what we're working with changes just by rotating this environment here. This is a really awesome tool for setting the mood of whatever thing you're trying to make. Okay, I'll press Shift Z to disable the render preview there. We also have rotational controls for the X and Y values as well. Typically, this is a lot more useful if you're using some sort of space environment, which the 16K HDR pack of 50 environment maps you can get at blendersensei.com comes with 5 space maps, which if you're here on Earth, changing the rotation of the horizon line of the planet, doesn't make a lot of sense. But there are reasons for this, such as space maps. We also have this Reset Dimensions button, which I've come to discover that having a way to quickly reset anything you're testing allows you to feel a lot less inhibited to actually test things, because you're not afraid to test them when you can immediately, make things back the way they were. We also have scale control. If, I don't know, say you're creating a space warping effect, and you need the environment to be doing some stuff like this. New to Drag and Drop Environments 1.06 is the ability to drag and drop a second environment to mix with the first one you're using. Now this feature is only available while in cycles mode, but if you are in cycles mode, you'll notice this little plus sign. You press this button here. If you don't have a second environment loaded, you'll see this nice little message cluing you in about what's going on. It says, with the above option pressed, you can drag and drop another image into the 3D view to blend with the first one. The controls that display while this option is pressed will only affect the second environment image. This feature is for cycles only. So this is really cool because we can drop a second environment image in here to blend, and then we'll have completely separate controls for the position, rotation, color, lighting, and all that sort of stuff for the second environment. So to add a second environment, all we need to do is open up our library and then pick another environment we want to blend with the first one. Could be anything. Right now we're just using these skies here. So I'll pick this one, click, and then drag and let go in the 3D view. So now you can see these two environments actually blended together simultaneously. While this is pressed, everything below our energy controls, all this starting with remove environment 2, this will only affect the second environment image we drop down. And then if we press this, we'll go back to having regular controls over our first environment. So first up here, we have the ability to remove the second environment if we decide we don't want it. We can also use this to control the amount that the second environment is blended with the first one. So the higher I bring this, the more it will just display the second environment, and the lower I make it, the more it will display the original environment. We can also change the blend mode, which, whoa, that looks kind of sweet. And then we can adjust the rotation and position and everything of the second environment we dropped in separately from the first one, in addition to changing its color too. So if we wanted to say, give it some sort of weird purpley hue. Is that pink? Purple? Whatever. Could do like this. And we could open up the color controls, and this would affect just that second mixed environment we have in there, which is really sweet. This is getting really psychedelic really quick. Then we could take a look at this craziness in a live render preview. So I'm going to press Shift Z. Yeah, that's definitely an apocalyptic, crazy looking thing we got going on there. I kind of like it. Anyway, the ability to mix these environments and then have separate control over them is a really awesome new feature I'm really excited about in Drag and Drop Environments 1.06. Press Shift Z to stop that. One really cool thing I like to do with this feature is mix space star maps with like sky maps. It looks really ethereal and cool. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and remove this second environment by pressing that. And that removes that for us and gets us back to just our original environment. And then I'm going to go up a directory in my library folder. And this is actually in the original environments folder, but as you can see, I've added a few more things in here while you weren't looking. In addition to the 5 16K sky environments that come with Drag and Drop Environments, I've added the space folder, which is included in the 16K HDR sky map pack of 50 16K HDR skies you can get at blendersensei.com. And I've also added a folder of SIBL format images and HDRs to show you how Drag and Drop Environments can really easily work with those, and a folder containing a video file because Drag and Drop Environments now better handles drag and dropping animated background environments as well. But for now, I'm going to click on the space folder, and with this off, I'm going to drag one of my space environments into the background here. I'm going to click this space 04 and let go of it in here. And so now we have this really gorgeous space environment. So let's press the plus button so we can add another environment. And I'll go up a directory, click on skies, and mix one we haven't used yet here, the Sky 09. And yeah, that's immediately crazy looking. As you can see, the color settings that we used on the previous environment are still intact, but we can press reset color and have those returned. I'll go ahead and close up my library here. And of course, I can rotate this. We can change the amount that it is blended in here, or change the way that it is being blended, or we could switch this to overlay. Maybe split the difference there to 0.05. It's pretty sweet looking. I think I liked it best on mix, which is what it's set to by default. You can see the way this overlays with those stars and stuff is really, really cool. Of course, if we wanted to go back to controlling the first environment we dropped in there, which was a space, we just turn the plus sign off. Now we're back to controlling the initial environment. Anyway, this is a really neat feature. I'm sure you'll come up with lots of really sweet ways to use it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reset this and reset the dimensions of the second one and press remove environment 2, so we go back to just having the one environment. And I'm going to go ahead and close up our color control there. Let's talk about some of Drag and Drop Environment's really awesome options and features. So to access the Drag and Drop Environments options, all you do is press this little accordion button that we're so used to with mobile devices and things these days. So we'll press that. You can see we have lighting options as well as add-on preferences. So this first option is really only relevant when using Blender Render. By default, Drag and Drop Environments, when you drop a environment image into Blender Render, it will activate global light settings, which ensure that when rendering in Blender Render mode, the environment lighting actually affects the objects. Now for Blender Render, this makes rendering really, really slow, but it can add, really good detail. But if you prefer to only exist visually as a background and not have the light in Blender Render affect the objects in your scene, you can uncheck this option. There's also the option to only render lighting. This is for both Blender Render and Cycles. This is good for doing product shots, things that you want to be able to save as transparent PNGs or transparent TIFFs or what have you, and just have the effects of the lighting on the object. So for instance, if we were to activate this setting and then do a render preview by pressing Shift Z, we will only see the lighting effects from the environment and not the environment itself. Now, this giant plane we're using for an ocean is part of the objects, so it sort of looks like the environment, but if we were to render this out, all the black area you see would be transparent and the environment would not be included. So this is another situation where being able to use dynamic source comes in handy, because you can control the lighting, which when you have a mostly dark night sky, there's not a lot of lighting being delivered to the objects in your scene. So we could jump that up to maybe 7. Probably increase that glossy energy value as well. And okay, yeah, that was way too much. But this option is basically if you just want to be able to render out, usually not a whole scene like this, but like say a watch or a bowl of flowers, something individual that you want to have a transparent background and you don't want the environment map showing up in it, you just want the effects of the lighting showing up. So I'll press Shift Z to stop that there, and probably return this to something a bit more reasonable. Next we have the display library option, so that's of course this button. You don't have to actually use the library feature or actually the drag and drop feature of this add-on. If you just want to be able to directly load environments through this menu here, you can turn this option off and then turn on disable drag and drop, and when you do, you'll see a little folder icon now appear. When that's on, you can, rather than drag and dropping images, you can just use this menu to directly select an environment to load. If for some reason you prefer to do it that way, you can. And we had adjusted these rotation values for our space environment, so that's why this looks all crazy. So let's press reset dimensions there, and now we're looking good. But I'm going to go ahead and turn that off and turn that back on because I rather like these features. Next we have the option to use related HDR. Not long ago it was discovered that you don't actually have to have incredibly massive HDR files to achieve really great rendering results. This is part of the philosophy behind the SIBL format and also the JPEG HDR format. Basically what you want is the actual visually what you're seeing in the environment. You want a really high res image, but that super high res image doesn't need to be loaded with dynamic color information like your HDR does. So what this allows you to do is drastically reduce the amount of resources that are being used by having a high-res JPEG or other file format backplate for the visual side of things, and then a corresponding identical high dynamic range map or EXR map, which is actually feeding the color information into the things that are getting rendered. So this option is on by default in drag and drop environments, and what it means is that if you drop an image into the 3D view to be loaded, drag and drop environments, it will search for the related HDR, HDRI, or EXR file with the same name. And it will not only search for it within the same folder, it will actually go up a folder and search all the folders above it or search all the folders within it. So this folder here is called HDR, but this could be called wild green tomatoes for all the add-on carriers. It's going to search everything in there to make sure it can find it and load that related file. This is also really useful for being able to have quickly generated preview images and not have Blender slog through trying to load these more complicated HDRs when you're looking for images to use. What's great about this is you could have a mix of images with a related HDR, or they could not have an HDR. If it doesn't find the HDR, it will substitute the reference for the HDR with the single image it's using and still provide you separate energy and lighting controls over that environment. However, if you don't want drag and drop environments looking for another image to load in, you can check that off. Also, unchecking it will unload the actual HDR image being used, and when you check it, it will do another live search for that image. So say I had this option off and I had dropped one of these JPEG images in here because I didn't feel like loading that and the HDR. So for instance, if we were to go to the node editor right now and take a look at that, notice that these are referencing the same JPEG image. Also, this JPEG image isn't loaded twice. It's not eating up twice the memory. These are referencing the same image data here. But notice that if we were to activate this, it will actually do that search on the spot and fill it in with the HDR. And this is useful if you're not really wanting to do rendering or render tests. You're more or less just want to be working with the environment while you're modeling or something like that, and you don't need it eating up any extra resources than it needs to. So when we go back there, you'll see that it is filled in and loaded that in for us, which is nice. Okay, so while we're on the subject matter of using related HDRs and the SIBL format, I want to recommend to you a really cool site where you can get a lot of free environments to use with this add-on, Blender, or any other 3D software. So I'm going to hop into Chrome here for a second. If in Chrome you just type in SIBL and HDRI, should be the first website that pops up is this hdrlabs.com. And this is just loaded with really cool environment images that basically use this setup, where most of these include a JPEG image and an HDR or EXR image that goes along with it. And so the awesome thing about Drag and Drop Environments add-on is that you can use these files the way they're meant to be used automatically. Now, the one caveat to this is sometimes the HDR and the JPEG image used don't have the same name, which is really annoying. So you have to make sure that the JPEG image and the HDR image have the same name, so they'll be automatically loaded by Drag and Drop Environments. But beyond that, these are super useful and free, which is very nice. So I've got some of these downloaded already. So if I go up a directory, here in this SIBL folder, I have this synthetic folder, which is some really great Lightroom styled lighting effects here. And in the locations folder, I have a lot of really awesome 360. Most of these are 8K, which is pretty nice, and with I think a 3K or 2K HDR maps associated with them. So keeping this option on for using these SIBLs is really useful. We could pick one of these and drag it out into our 3D view. And as you can see, this environment gets loaded here. And if we take a look under the hood in the node editor, you'll see that the JPEG is loaded as well as its related HDR, which is awesome. So we've got this great looking environment that's going to be lit by these really nice high dynamic range values as well. Another really awesome thing about this add-on and about being able to do this in general is just sometimes you may not even be using an environment to really light your scene or do anything. Sometimes it's just nice to have something like this to work with. Like say you just want to put yourself in the mindset of, the environment you're working with on, something you're modeling. Can be really cool. I'm gonna go ahead and change this to selected, and hide the visibility of the water so we can see the rest of this environment in here, which is really sweet. Let's take a look at a few more of these. Environments like this is really great for product shots as well. Like a lot of times you don't necessarily need to be inside a room, or it doesn't make sense to have your objects inside a room like this. However, the lighting produced from such a place for like a product shot or something can be really great. And that's also another time that using the only render lighting option would be really useful with these type of setups and Lightroom setups. Next, we have this option, JPEG represents HDR. This is for use when you're not using a high resolution JPEG backplate in combination with an HDR, but you just say have a pack of like HDRs that maybe they're really large and they're really way too big and bulky for Blender to be able to produce preview thumbnails of them. And usually these things, if you buy them and purchase them in packs, will come with preview thumbnails. What this will do, if you have this option checked, is whatever thumbnail JPEG you drop into the 3D view, it won't load that thumbnail. It will just load the related HDR or EXR file. So for instance, in this collection of Sybil files I've downloaded, there's actually a synthetic Lightroom collection of images on their website, which is really cool. However, these do not include any JPEG backplates. These are all thumbnails. So this would be ideal for this situation. We could activate this, and when we drop one of these JPEG thumbnails in, all the lighting and everything will just come straight from the HDR or the EXR. We could take something like this and drag it in here. And everything we're seeing right now is coming from the HDR. So if we take a look under the hood, the node editor, that particular file was EXR type. So the actual file, the big one, is what gets loaded in here and referenced by these different color groups that give us dynamic control over everything. So we can switch this back to 3D view. Then we have the option to remove file images, which is checked by default. And what this will do is whenever you drag and drop a new environment image into a 3D view, it will remove the one that you previously loaded to help conserve memory. Then we have load for cycles, which if you uncheck this and drag and drop an environment in, it will only load for Blender render if you want that. And then use mirror ball. For the most part, most HDR maps that you use in 3D software like Blender are equirectangular, which is a type of map, but there are some mirror ball mapping. So if you have some of those, you can check that. And then the type of mapping that will be used is mirror ball. Then you have disable drag and drop, which we already talked about. If you check this, you'll get a little folder option to directly load in environments rather than drag and dropping them in. And then load as reference. When this is checked, whatever image that you drag and drop into Blender will be loaded as an environment image, but it will also be loaded as a reference background image, which is usually used for like aid with modeling or like a blueprint when designing something, and does not show up when you render. It's only for reference purposes and will display in orthographic views like front view, top view, etc. So it's not likely that you'll ever need this checked, but there may be rare instances where you want to have a reference picture display in an orthographic view, but also be your world environment for some reason. Okay, that about does it for options. Next to the options button is a really amazing new feature in drag and drop environments version 1.06. It is the capture environment feature. So if we click this open, we'll see a whole new set of tools here. And this is, once again, only for cycles mode. This allows you to very quickly and easily create environment maps from your scenes within Blender. To demonstrate how this works, we're going to close our library and open up a new file. So I'm just going to press File, New, and reload Startup File. And if we press this button to display our capture environment, first we have the button capture. And what this will do is create an environment map of everything in the scene. So right now there's only a cube in the scene, but if say we were to move this around and duplicate it a few times, maybe add a monkey head or something, and we were to press capture, we have now created an equirectangular image of our scene, which can be loaded as an environment. But right now the image isn't saved anywhere, it's just sitting here in the UV image editor. So what we can do is select a path to automatically save these captures to. And a good place to set this path up is where you keep your other environments, so you'll have immediate access to them whenever you press the library button. So let's select a location here. I'm just going to click on Desktop and Environment, and I'm going to create a new folder and call this Captures, and this is where our captures will go. Press Accept there. Now normally you would probably want to set this up on a blank fresh file, so you could then press File and Save Startup File to save those settings for whenever you use Blender in the future. However, since this is just for a demonstration, I'm not going to bother with that since we've already adjusted this scene some. Down here, we can control how this file will save once we set up a save path. Do we want it to be a JPEG, a TIFF, PNG? We can also choose the default resolution size. Now keep in mind that the larger you make these sizes, the larger it's going to take to render these environments when captured. So if you're just doing this for testing purposes, probably best to make it 1K or 2K, which is 2000 by 1000, as these are equirectangular images. You don't want to make it too large when you're just, testing things out. And then we have some additional options. So we can actually, as soon as we capture the environment in a very Inception-like way, we can automatically load that capture and we'll see a 2D spherical representation of everything in our scene in the actual environment, which is pretty cool. So I'm actually going to go ahead and check mark that so we can see as that happens. Now, if you have animated your scene and you're trying to create an animated video equirectangular background environment, you can actually check mark this. You can also check the option to use my camera. What this will do is it will capture the equirectangular environment from the location of your current camera. If this is not checkmarked, then the camera will be transformed to the center of the scene and set up to view in one of these directions here. So basically this sets the orientation of the equirectangular image that's captured. Okay, so now that we've got all that set up, let's press capture. And there you go. Since we had auto load captured, the image was saved. If we click on our library button, we'll see our captures folder here and the image which was saved. And we can also see this very strange, very minimal scene now 2D projected onto our background environment, which is very interesting. The whole idea behind this is for speed and to make it easy to do a lot of testing. So these will be automatically serialized. So if we were to add some more stuff, say to our scene here, and we were to press capture again. And of course, since we had auto load check marked there, the new capture gets immediately loaded in. And wow, this is starting to feel really weird, which is why I do most of the things I do, so I can make awesome stuff that makes me feel very strange. And yeah, so you can see those rendered into the background. Of course, the resolution isn't set very high, and we don't have any materials on these things. If you were wondering, will the capture also capture the environment behind it? The answer is yes. However, you can't really tell because everything was in the same position. Also, to see the new environment image we just got, you'll need to go up a directory and then back so you can see it refresh there. But there's that second one. So we could drop that first one in. And there it is, much more minimal before we added those things. And here's that second one, like that. So actually, if we change the orientation of which the camera is facing to say up and render this again, we should see not only a capture of the background environment, all this stuff here, but then a new impression of the objects in the scene too. So let's capture one more. All right, so now we have a third environment image. If we go up a directory and go back into our captures folder, we'll see that refreshed here. And as you can see, this image is different from this one. It's all the same exact items, but because we changed the orientation, all the items were captured into the environment map in addition to the stuff the camera was seeing already in this world environment. So yeah, it's starting to look really crazy. I want to actually see it without all the stuff in it. So I'm going to press A twice because this is Blender default and not Sensei Format. And I'm going to press delete. Hopefully it won't delete anything I need. And now I can just see the environments we've been capturing here. So yeah, this is a lot of fun and potentially a really cool method for making your own environment maps. Especially if you wanted to get really fancy with this and make a really large map. These are the default sizes you can select, but you can also, if you select C here, which stands for custom, you can choose any image format you need. Especially if you are creating an animated capture, you would want to change this to probably a video file format. And you can set up the resolution to be whatever you want. These are just quick convenience settings for testing. One last feature I want to discuss before we go here, the new drag and drop environments add-on now handles video clip environments as well as image environments. So if I click on my library button here and environments, I have this video folder where I just have a single 360 video footage that I downloaded off the internet. Basically, to use a video clip, it's the same as any other image environment. You just click and drag it out into the 3D view. And you are all set up and ready to go with using a video footage. I think this is of a TIE fighter in Thailand, and this works for Blender render as well as cycles, and all the same options, color controls, everything pretty much works the same except for its video footage and animated. Now, the one caveat to this is that we can't see the actual video footage play while in cycles mode, even though drag and drop environments automatically turns on auto refresh and various other settings to make sure we can only see the actual animation happening in the live 3D view in Blender render mode, and it's quite clunky when it does. But if I press play here, you can see this animation going on. You can see the guy looks like he's about to bust open that default cube. He's not having it with that cube. But here's this full 360 environment here. Now the animated environments will render properly. So if you create an animation with, say, an animated video clip, if say you've got some drone footage of some 360 clouds or something you've captured, that will indeed render out with each frame, but it's in cycles even. But it won't show up in the live 3D view like it does in Blender render. Not yet anyway. I'm sure that'll be hammered out in the future with the Blender developers. About to bust that cube right open again. Ooh, elbow to the cube. All right, so I'm gonna pause this and switch this back to cycles render. Let's add a subsurface modifier to this cube. Crank up the level some. Add some smooth shading. Press tab to go into edit mode. And I'm gonna subdivide this a few times just so I have this nice cube here, and we'll add like a real shiny material so we can see how the lighting from it is affecting the object. First, press use nodes on that material, switch this to glossy, maybe add a little bit of roughness, just a tiny bit, and let's press Shift Z. And here we can see this video footage, clearly the lighting on here affecting this cube. I'll scale this cube up so you can see even more, and maybe we'll turn the roughness off. Yeah, so you can see the reflections. Ooh, there's the dude seeing himself inside the cube. I'm having a lot of fun right now. I just wish that cycles would automatically update when we played the animation. It will render out each frame of animation, like I said, but has a little more trouble updating in the live 3D view. Now, while I'm render previewing like this, I can press play and then pause it and wait for it to update. Anyway, so I think you get the basic idea. Once again, all the color controls, all the dimensions, everything works the same on video clips as it does on image clips now. So yeah, there's that. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and I hope you get a lot of use out of the drag and drop environments add-on. And if you like that add-on, be sure to check out the 16K HDR Sky Pack to go along with it at blendersensei.com. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.